them off now. Okay, so let's move on to the next topic. And actually, it's interesting, somebody brought up the protest thing, because I think this is relevant to this. So one of the things we wanted to talk about was the different perspectives of the different major participants in a procurement process. And if you think about three in particular, you have the procurement official, who's, as you mentioned, is often incentive to avoid a protest, and there's a certain sort of risk aversion that comes with that. We have a project manager, who's often incentive from a schedule. They've got a deadline to meet. And then you've got the business sponsor, who's often more incented by business outcomes than anything else. And so I was interested in your thoughts about how to deal with that in terms of different perspectives, if you've seen where that's been an issue, and how would you address it? And I want to start with Mike this time.
Yes. We talked about it. Or we, yes. Yeah. I got to go like this.
Yeah, I would say that's always an issue in everything that we do. And I would go even a little bit further than the folks that you mentioned. So last night when I was thinking about this, okay, so we're undertaking our biggest tax modernization system that we've ever done at the Franchise Tax Board. We have a $401 million contract right now. So when I think, and I know EDD does some big stuff, and you guys have all been involved in some big stuff, but when I think about all the players that are involved in this process, I came up with elected officials, including the governor's office, agency-level personnel, the Department of Finance, the Department of General Services, the executives within our own organization, the managers within our organization, the employees, the budget officer, the procurement and contracting officer, the project office, the procurement staff. The theory that we work under is that we're all, and I don't know that we'll ever get out of our silos. I hear that all the time, and I don't know so much that we're going to get out of our silos, but that we need to find ways to get all these people together to figure out what success is, so that when we get to the end of the project, we can all look back and go, that was a success, not just one of those stakeholder groups. Because, we could have project success, but we could have violated the contract. That's not good for the procurement and contracting officer. We could have had a protest, which is not good for the employee. We could have gone over budget. That's not good for the budget officer. It could be delayed. That's not good for the project manager. So we've all got this kind of hodgepodge of different issues that we're dealing with, and the expectation is, we're all after the same goal. Well, yeah, we all want project success, but what does that mean to everybody? Project success is going to mean a little bit different, have a little bit of a different spin for everybody that's involved in that process. So I do think we come at it from different perspectives, and it takes a mature organization or a leader or whoever it may be to be the one that gets all these people together. Now, the external agencies, we can't do anything about that. We can leave that to our executives. Our budget officer deals with finance.
You could call me anytime.
Yes, we could call you. But where we really can take care of that is internally within our own organization. We've got a pretty strong governance within our organization, but even with our governance, there's so much that's going on. It's hard to keep everybody informed and included, but I think that's one of the ways that we try and mitigate that risk. So yeah, I think it's always an issue.
Sheri?
One group that you forgot were the labor unions.
Yes.
Which, yeah. So, like you did just last night, a project should do, as part of its project planning, is identifying all of your stakeholders, and it's all your external, internal, and in external include not just state external, but
local governments if they're involved.
Local governments, EDD's primarily federally funded, so we had to, Department of Labor's in there for us, but also the vendor community, because some of them get upset when you tell them no about something, or they want to change a requirement and you say no, or they want to be involved and you say no, or you point them in a direction they just don't want to go, so then they run to the governor's office or whatever, or they're lobbyists. You'll have lobbyists come
but
talk to you.
But they're not maybe noted as a lobbyist.
No, you don't know until they get in there and you're like, oh my God. But so just identify all the stakeholders, everyone that you need to have involved, because sometimes you're thinking you're so focused on the project and the outcomes of it that you forget to look at all the touch points and all the staff. I mean, there's some HR issues potentially. You need to include fiscal, make sure you have your budget authority and all that. So, I mean,
because as soon as you tell anybody in the department or the Department of Finance, here's a word that there might be savings, they want to know immediately how much you're going to save and how many people you're not going to need to hire for the project or have in the future with the project. So there's cause and effect with so many different people when you're looking at even a small project. And hopefully at some point we can get more to outcomes. Some of the nuggets that I've taken away from some of the speakers today is they're speaking a lot about outcomes. You've got your requirements, but really, what are we looking for? We're looking for outcomes and having success marks around those outcomes. And wouldn't that be a great way to move forward in the procurement process? And I think there's some room for that. And I think there's also some room for being able to set up a framework around through the procurement process, through the project planning, to the contract, where you can have a framework around in that contract where you could actually be able to make some changes or switch out some requirements or reprioritize requirements as you're building the solution. Because how many of us have been involved where we start building the solution and we go, oh, wait, that's not really what we thought, and now we want to reprioritize things, and then you're looking at maybe the same scope but just different requirements. So it'd be nice to be able to build a framework around outcomes.
Do you have anything to add?
Do you have anything?
No.
Okay.
Trying to still avoid a protest at all costs.
I'm like, bring it on.
At the end of the day, it delays the project, the implementation of the actual project. At OSI, or Health and Human Services Agency, we have different federal partners, and so we can go through the whole procurement process. Technically, we cannot make the award until we get our federal partners' approval, and that takes anywhere from 60 days to 90 days. So if we get a protest, that can really blow a schedule. So we try to keep our federal partner as a stakeholder involved all the time. So fortunately, for the 3 6611s that I have done, we have not had a protest.
Well, you can't have a protest, but they could take you to court immediately.
Right, but the good news about that is because we used the alternative protest process that was given to us, so we knew that we were going to be able to avoid that process. So again, it's looking at the tools that we have available to us to mitigate the risk of having the protests. So.
Have you seen anything in terms of a trend where people are protesting more than they used to? I know in the federal marketplace, it's almost routine. People just expected any big procurement now. It's almost 100% guaranteed it will be protested by the incumbents.
Actually, I've seen the opposite. I mean, since the state put in, well, at least maybe in the commodity market, but since the state put in the fact that the protestor, I mean, I remember when I first started with DGS, everything was protested, it was just, because there was no skin in the game for the supplier. Right? I mean, the supplier could protest anything. I mean, we would protest when we buy lettuce. My goodness, it was awful. Those poor food buyers. My heart, my heart always hurt for them because the food suppliers, a lot of them in those days everything was protested. It was just horrific. So once we changed that, so now they at least have to be, when they protest, they at least have to do their write-up and put some money down. Mm-hmm. And if they lose the protest, it could cost them more additional funds. It seems like we have less protests than we did when I first started with the state anyway.
Okay.
It's not very much money, and for the larger procurements, it really isn't a deterrent. But again, I have seen a reduction in it as well. So,
And I think it may be because we're getting a little better at writing requirements, evaluation criteria, and so they just don't have grounds for protest. So I think we're just getting better, perhaps.
Well, and they're limited on what they can protest.
Right.
And it's typically on the process that we didn't follow our own process, because the vendor community has had the ability to protest our requirements all the way up until we get to award. So the only thing that's left for them is, after we do the intent, is to protest that we did not follow our own process. They can't protest that we awarded wrong. That we didn't select the right vendor. And if they're asserting that we didn't select the right vendor, again, it would have to be on our evaluation criteria or on our process. So they don't have much left to protest.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions on this topic around, perspectives? Yes, please.
No, I just wanted to add that what I like to do is include a deadline to protest the requirements.
Right.
You have that locked down and protest after that day.
And typically we do put that date in there, but at the end of the day, they can protest up till the last minute. But it is a good idea to put it in there, because at least you can know that if you don't get any at that point, the ones that you get that are late, they're going to protest anyway, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so.
Okay. Any other questions on this?
A little bit off topic. I'm specifically interested in sole source with goods services pertaining to IT and how that process.
Okay, so the question was around sole source of goods pertaining to IT and how that process works.
So that word, those two words went out of my brain about, when was that management memo that changed sole source
96.
to NCB? Non-competitive bid?
Yes. So yes, it was a sole source, and now it's a non-competitive bid.
Those were the days, boy. Those were confusing days. So we still, I think that people, and Joe might speak to this as an AIO having to go to agency, but the secretary anyway, but I think that our customers are doing a much better job of justifying when it really is an NCB, and we are doing a much better job getting it up and through the system when it really truly is an NCB. There is a reason to have the non-competitive bid process or the old sole source process. It isn't because we don't want to do competition. It is because it is the thing that makes the most sense. So I don't know. What do you see? Do you see your secretary being a little more open to signing an NCB than they were, say, 10 years ago?
What I see happening is we got our hands slapped maybe 3 or 4 years ago, where DGS was kind of saying no more NCBs, kind of reducing them. Mm-hmm. So there became a lot of pushback to the departments and their IT procurements to do a much better job of screening those before they even got submitted to DGS.
Okay.
So I think what's happening is we've gotten better on what is a compelling business case for an NCB, and I think we got better on pushing back the business, because we got in a position where we just wanted to serve the customer. So we were taking the NCB and there's too much we could do to get it done because they wanted it now. And we weren't really willing to stand up and say, you know what, this is never going to pass the smell test. We're going to spend more time going back and forth, and we're going to lose credibility with DGS, and we're going to make our secretary look bad. So I think over the last several years, we've done a much better job now on making sure what goes forward, pretty much 99.9% of the time is going to get approved. Now, has that reduced the number of NCBs? I don't know. I think the quality is much better.
Yes, and that's what I see having to review.
I think it's also helped having leveraged procurements, and so we have so many more avenues to buy that are simpler than going out and doing a formal competitive bid that can be protested. So with the leveraged procurements, you can kind of narrow your vendor pool. In some cases, on strategic sourcing, the ones you want are out there. You're an HP shop and you want to buy HP equipment, and so you can go right to the strategic sourcing contract and buy it. So it's no longer a sole source. So that's taken some of that away, and I think that's helped a lot too.
It helped a lot.
The other thing that I found helpful is if you find yourself in an NCB situation, as Joe was saying, is again, I involve the control agency immediately. We start working on a draft NCB that DGS executives can support, as well as the department can support, and then as well as agency. I don't put anything to my agency. I don't put an NCB to my agency secretary until I know DGS is going to buy off on it, or now with STPD that they're going to buy off on it. So you need to include that planning time to get the control agencies all on board. And sometimes when you're doing an NCB on IT, depending on that dollar amount that's changing, you could put yourself in a Section 11 position where you have to notify then the legislature. If you're making a change to an IT contract that's over $500,000, then you're going to have to do a Section 11, possibly an SPR, so it really depends on where you're at. So soon as you think that you might be in an NCB situation, you need to contact your internal people and start working with the control agencies to get it on.
Sure, Joe.
And what's important about that is they become a public record.
Yes.
So the competing vendor, they're all watching who's buying what, you know what you're doing. So all of a sudden they felt that they can satisfy your business need. You get an NCB, you do a PRA, they get the document, and then somebody mentioned earlier lobbyists, and so they go to the lobbyists, and all of a sudden you as a CIO signed off on it, and you're over there in hearings. How do you explain your rationale in the NCB if you mislead information in there? So it's really in your best career interest to make sure the stuff that you talked about ahead of time, no surprises, and everybody's on the same page going forward.
And all NCBs get posted, Joe. I'm sure you know that. So as soon as you get an NCB approved, it gets posted, and that's when the vendor community starts on the public records request.
Okay. So I have a little bit of an interesting take on NCBs. I'll try and make it quickly here. And I think I alluded to earlier, my viewpoint changed a lot when I went to work at DGS for a couple of years. So when I worked for Jim Butler, I think some of you know who he is, DGS looks at NCBs as the last resort. And we've given you this bevy of tools you can use, be it a competitive procurement, leverage procurement agreement. Some things are exempt from competition. And after all that, if you still say nobody can do this service, it has to be this company, then they will engage in NCB and consider that NCB, which is a little bit different than how the departments look at it sometimes, because I think the departments look at it sometimes like all of these procurement vehicles are on equal footing. I can do a competitive bid, I can do a leverage procurement agreement, or I can do an NCB. That's not how DGS looks at it. DGS, I probably went around to some meetings touting this chart that said, look, over the last X number of years, look at how NCBs have decreased. So DGS is looking at it at the macro level, so to speak, because they have to answer for that. They do get called by a lot of lobbyists, whereas maybe the departments are looking at it on the micro level. Well, it just makes sense to me that no other contractor can do this because XYZ. That doesn't make sense to our agency folks, although they're very supportive, and it certainly doesn't make sense to DGS. So I think that's what I'm hearing from the three of you is when we do an NCB, we really put the time in to make sure that it's supportable, because we're having our executive officer sign it, we're having our agency secretary sign it, and certainly when it gets to DGS, it will go a lot smoother if we have a solid business case when we send it down there. And having been at DGS, it's amazing to me that everybody thinks that they write pristine NCBs, but some of them came through my shop and I'd read it and go, there's nothing here that tells me this contractor is the only one that could do it. What it does tell me is this is the one that they like the best, which is a little bit different. So that's a little bit of their perspective on NCBs.
I know the Department of Justice has one of the best reasons to do for NCBs. And we actually started when I was there, and after the management memo came out, we finally realized there were some special categories, right? So I think DGS still has special category exemptions. So it's almost like if you let DGS know and you've got a really good case, like I know the first one we did as a special category exemption was Department of Justice, and it was the DNA testing kits. So they had, invested all of this time, money, and energy in outcomes of the tests, right? But the machines and all the readers and everything for the outcomes only would take in one type of test kit. So there was so much investment in outcomes and the data and where it was stored and how it was stored. There was really no choice but to continue to use this one manufacturer's swab stick. So we put up a special category exemption for that category so that you would have almost like a okay to an NCB process for a whole year for that special category. So there are things that DGS will do to help to meet our business needs.
Okay, so I'm going to move us on to the